Hello and welcome to Changemakers, a new podcast from Civil Service World. I'm Suzannah Brecknell, Editor-in-Chief of Civil Service World, and in this series I'll be meeting people who are working to make change happen across the public sector. We've always loved to celebrate interesting and innovative things here at CSW, and our aim in this series is not just to talk about what people are doing, but how they are doing it and really get under the skin of innovation in government. In our first episode, which you can find on the Civil Service World feed wherever you get your podcasts, we met an official who is exploring how to build the conditions needed to make innovation flourish in her department. In this episode, which is supported by Capita, we will be discussing robots and agents in government. That might sound like a tantalising spy thriller sci-fi mashup, but I promise you it's all real life. First of all, I'll be talking to Ben Lovatt, Deputy Director, Contact Engagement Platform at HMRC, about some of the robots who are working, I was going to say for Ben in HMRC, but actually they're working for us, the taxpayer in HMRC, and they're doing jobs that might not spring to mind when you think about robot workers. But what they're doing is so effective that if for whatever reason the platform is down, Ben and his colleagues need to start thinking about standing up a whole new call centre to make up for the drop in efficiency because the robots are not working. After we've heard about those robots and how they've been rolled out, Ben and I will be talking to Owen Barry, Capita's Managing Director and Partner for Central Government, and Duncan Brown, Head of Software Engineering at AI, or the Incubator for AI, if you don't know the acronym, in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. We'll be talking about so-called Agentic AI and how we can start getting ready for it. So Ben.
Hi.
Hi. Innovation usually starts with a problem. So I'm interested to understand the challenge that you were trying to solve with these robots, the project we're going to talk about. Can you explain the challenge in system architecture terms, first of all?
Yeah.
And then what that actually means in practice for the staff at HMRC and the public?
I don't think it'll come as any surprise to anyone listening that HMRC's architecture is legacy. A lot of it is very, very old. And tying that legacy architecture together is quite difficult sometimes. Now, that's normally done by humans. So we normally have people answering calls, working cases, checking multiple different systems. We call them HODs, for heads of duty. That is slow. It can be quite inefficient. So we wanted ways to join these things together to make it a little bit easier for people. So trying to bring a dispersed and quite unconnected legacy estate together into one pile that makes it easier for people to access information and be able to process that as quickly as they possibly can. So
the challenge for staff is finding that information took time on their calls.
It takes a lot of time, and this is coming as the climate in HMRC at that point was we were moving to a lot of regional centres, so we were reducing the amount of smaller centres we had around. There may be some jobs being repositioned and people moving around, so we were having to do more with less. So we needed to work out ways of improving the efficiency of our caseworkers, but also improving the efficiency of our IT as well to meet that demand.
Okay, because as you said, it's not a surprise to see that there's unjoined up data in a bit of government, but that change to the regional centres was the kind of impetus for this project.
We saw a reduction in the number of people we had working on these things, so we needed to improve the IT.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So before we get to the solution that you've implemented, I know you're an engineer by background,
yes,
rather than sort of project or programme manager. How do you think that has influenced the way you think about this problem and others?
So typically people think about automation. So when we talk about automation processing as replacing a process that somebody does manually, so filling in a form or something else, with a robot, with an automation capability that can do that instead. What we looked at and what our colleagues at Capita and our other suppliers were looking at as well, with helping out with, was let's approach this from a more holistic view. So let's look at the overall problem, an engineering problem, instead of a process problem, and see how we can fix that. So the solution we're talking about at the moment, which we call DODGE, which is digitization of data gathering, is actually a second phase for an original one that we rolled out in 2016. So in 2016, we had a disparate set of robots that were doing lots of little different things. We have a more holistic, modularized approach now that's expandable. We've got a lot more automation and reporting inside there as well. It makes it a lot better for our users to actually use it. So
can you explain in as simple terms as possible what is the solution that's now in place to address the problem?
It sounds really simple, which all these things often are. But when a caseworker is working a case, they often need to go and get information from 10, 20, 30 different sources, bring that together, validate it, make sure it's correct, and then perform sort of risking on it as well. So we want to make sure if this is a potential fraudulent claim, either by accident or not, or if there's something we need to look at in more detail. Gathering that information together with some legacy systems is very, very, very slow. But if we can get enough information together, we can set robots doing that for the caseworker. So while the caseworker is working on something that requires human intervention, they're working through a process, in the background, this robot is assembling all of this information to present it to the user. Really simple solution to a problem that saves, I don't know, between 2.5 and 8 hours per case. So we're talking over 100 FTE saved at the moment. It's probably going to be more as we roll it out. But this is a really good use of automation that's not always thought about. It's gluing those legacy systems together instead of having some fancy tech over the top of it.
Sure. And I will get to the kind of impact in terms of savings. Yeah. But how was the system built? So was it in-house? Did you worked with Capita on part of it? Did you bring in new systems, or did you work with something that you already had?
So the teams are hybrid teams. So we work closely with a supplier. This is a supplier contract that we have with Capita who provide architectural and software engineering support for us. But we also have HMRC perms as well doing this. So Capita acts as a bit of burst capacity for us as well sometimes, so we can do some different things. And they bring expertise that we don't have. The platform that we use is a robotics platform called NICE. We've had it for a while, and we've expanded upon its capabilities. So we didn't buy anything new. This was all using the capabilities we already had on the ground. We've expanded on those capabilities and used them in a way that I don't think anybody really thought about before. Okay, so this kind of, my question that I'm asking most of the change makers I speak to is around how the system, the solution you have now evolved from your original plans. So I guess in this case, it's quite interesting because it evolved from something that was there for quite a while. So it starts off as a manual process. So we have caseworkers working on something. In 2016, we had that impetus and a push to say, okay, we're reducing the number of people working on some of these cases. So how can we automate that? So we automate it. But like all solutions where you're adding bits in, there tend to be layering inside there and added complexity because you're not looking at the whole problem. As soon as you start stepping back a little bit and putting your head up and looking at that entire problem, there are better ways of doing this, which is what I think we're calling it One Dodge is doing at the moment, which is bringing all those together into more of a platform service rather than disparate robots that go away and are triggered to come back. There's more intelligence. There's more finding out of what information is required. It's the sort of thing that you probably start seeing in more modern CCaaS systems now, so contact center as a service systems. But we've done it already, and we've put it on top of our systems. Okay,
so I think when people start to talk about robotics, there can be an automation, there can be a kind of fear as well as an interest and excitement. So how did you approach rolling out the new system? Did you find that the users in HMRC were resistant, were kind of nervous of it?
I've been working in digital and HMRC for 10 years, and there's always some fear when we look at bringing in new automated or digital solutions that's going to be job losses. We try to overcome this fear by bringing those people along with us. We want to know what our end users want to use. So we go and speak to caseworkers. We explain what's going to be done and how we're going doing it. And what we've seen actually happen is a shift to more productive use of people's time, doing more interesting things rather than the bog standard things that robots can do. You know what? Changing addresses, you're doing complex case investigation and compliance activities, which is much more interesting. But the fundamental is bring the users along with you. You've got to find out what their problems are, how you can help solve those problems with them and collaborate with them. The feedback we're getting from people now is that it works, they're using it well, there's no fear. We haven't suddenly shut down call centers, for example. We've got enough stuff to handle. We've got a lot of other things that come in. This is just one solution in a whole raft of other things we need to do.
I think when we spoke before, we said there's no part of government where people feel actually they're perfectly resourced, they can do their job with no stress and they wouldn't need some help from someone else if they could get it, or some robot. So what's been the impact? What's the kind of efficiency and saving gains that you've seen?
I'll have to consult my notes for this one because there was quite some bits of information inside there. So I think we're looking at over 100 FTE. I think it's probably more than that at the moment. When we talk FTE, it's full-time equivalent. So if we had people doing this job, this is what we'd need them to do. The actual compliance activities themselves are saving between 100 million and £1 billion worth of compliance activities every single year. So this is significant money we're getting back from the taxpayers. The number of cases that are being processed have gone up roughly 370% over the last 3 years. These are significant involvements. If we look at one of our other robotic solutions, something that we do for self-assessment, which I'm sure a lot of people do, we saw I think it's a 6.4 year backlog cleared in, say, 4 months. This is obviously that was going to be worked through and it was going to get done, but this is how fast these things can work. And that wasn't at the cost of people. That was just improving people's working lives.
So what's next for you in terms of increasing use of robots and automation at HMRC?
Quite a lot, I hope. So we're here to talk about AI as well. So we're going to have some discussions on those things. But I think there's also a role for automation in doing what this Dodge solution does, which is gluing together disparate legacy systems to make them work for us. So fixing the data, because obviously with AI solutions, it's only as good as the information you're going to be able to put into it, garbage in, garbage out. So I think we'll see more of those solutions where we can step back a little bit and say, well, we don't necessarily need to replace this thing that's working quite well. It just doesn't work as well as we'd like it to. Maybe we can do a bit of gluing on top of that, sort of platform gluing those different things together to make sure that we can have an appropriate solution that's much faster than it used to be before.
Yeah,
I think that's where I'd really like to take some of that extra stuff.
Yeah, and again, I think we spoke before about it. You know, government is really good now at designing the front end of services and like looking at user experience and service user journeys. But actually, what we're seeing you using robots here to do is to actually help fix some of the problems we've really been struggling with in the back.
Yes, exactly. Our digital systems, our digital front end systems are world beating in some cases, are amazing. But they rely on quite, in some cases, creaky architecture or creaky systems in the background. They've been there for a long time. That's the way it is. If we can put something on top of them that makes it so the users don't even notice that they're dealing with systems that are older or can process these things faster anyway, that's fantastic for us. That solves everything we need.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Ben. We're going to open up a little bit, think about wider use of robots in the public sector and also the next generation of automated systems. So, Owen and Duncan, I'm going to ask you to give us, before we think about near future, give us your favourite example of where automation or RPA, robotics processing automation, is that right? You guys are the tech guys, you're going to have to check with me, are being used in the public sector. Owen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we've got a really current, exciting example that we do for TfL, Transport for London, that we've just gone live with this month. And it's really relevant to an awful lot of people, and it does a lot of good, actually. So TfL have recently opened a new tunnel under the Thames, the Silvertown Tunnel, and they're applying tolling to that tunnel and the Blackwall Tunnel. And what they've done to make it easier for people living in and around that area is apply a discount scheme for people in that location, charities and small businesses to make it work. Now, if we go back a few years, we probably would have rolled out a very people-heavy solution or service for TfL to ramp up for hundreds of thousands of discount applications, process that over a few months and ramp it back down. But what we've actually gone live with on the 7th of, the tunnel's opened on the 7th of April, is an automated solution. So if you're an applicant and you've submitted all your documentation, the automation checks those documents, validates and verifies things like identification, etc., and the proof of residence, and then will apply that discount in an automatic way to your account. Now, what that means in practice is operationally, it's much easier to execute that. We execute it on behalf of TfL. We do it with about a third of the people in terms of ramping up. So as a kind of sensible process, it's much more easy to run and provide a good customer service. But the real benefits are, if you're an applicant to that process, instead of waiting 4 days for someone to manually turn around, validate all your documents, you get it in 11 seconds. So if you've been driving through the tunnels, you put your application in, you don't have to go backwards and try and reclaim all the various discounts, which makes it a much better customer experience. We've created a lower cost service for TfL, which in turn is a benefit to customers and citizens using those facilities. But there's also a lovely, really good other benefit, which is around fraud detection and error. And this is some of the clever stuff. So we looked at automating this from a efficient and effective user experience service. But actually one of the byproducts of using the technology is it significantly reduces fraud and error, which is really relevant to every government department right now. So on an application, if somebody's submitted documentation and they've tampered with it or overlaid a different address to get the discount, the software will actually see through that. So it will do things a human eye can't see, and it will detect that. So it won't apply the discount to that case, and it will push it out into a human team to then go away and test and validate. So some really, really clever things that have a really significant impact, and that's made that scheme and the operation of that scheme significantly more cost effective, easier to operate, higher customer service, and better for people using it, and lower costs. So we're really pleased with that. And I know TfL are as well.
Great. And you heard it here first, rolled out this month.
Yeah.
Duncan, what about you, your favourite example?
So there's a team working in the incubator right now, and maybe this is sort of more in the realm of your work, Ben, which is absolutely music to my ears, hearing about taking all this gritty, sort of complicated data that's resting in databases all over the place and making it possible to read and compute on. In our case, there's a team in the incubator working on planning documents where they have a tool called Extract. So this government wants to build 300,000 houses, but a lot of the information that is required to make those planning processes work is all locked up in documents which basically are pre-digital. Some of them are handwritten, some of them are typed, some of them are maps. And what we can do is use basically AI as a reading machine to get that stuff into a state in which it can be sort of like thought about and computed upon. So veering a bit closer, I think, to the world of kind of like making the information available rather than making the decision kind of like there and then. That's a good example, I think, from our work of something where this is having a bit of an impact.
Lovely, thank you. So if we start looking to the near future, the term that I am starting to hear is agentic working. So this is not sort of just a robot performing a set task that you say, if this, do that. But it's actually robots performing tasks autonomously. You give them a goal and then they work out how to meet that goal and they kind of iterate and make their processes themselves. Is that a reasonable description? I'm going to hand over. Would any of you techies like to improve or correct any of that description?
No, I think you're spot on there. The clue's in the name, agentic. So it's acting as an agent.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, agentic is refining and optimizing a set of processes where before you might have seen something very linear and straightforward. It's actually optimizing it, and that's a really big step forward. I think what's really important in the area of agentics is government employees going forward, and actually in any industry, we will be managing these kind of agents in the future. So there's a huge opportunity for everybody to look at and adopt agentic AI. We do something, we rolled out something called a AI Catalyst Lab, where we do scans of businesses for our clients to look at where are the opportunities for agentic AI. But we also do it to ourselves. So, I mean, to put it in context for listeners today on how do we do it, where do we go, how do I find the opportunities of all this stuff we're hearing about? So we've done a scan of our own business using our AI Catalyst Lab, and we found, in a business of 40,000 people, 250 use cases right now that we're looking at of where can we deploy this. So if you put that in context and the kind of power and the impact it could have, we've applied it to our own recruitment process. So a lot of what we do is in response to government and scaling up to meet new policy, delivering services for government. So we recruit a huge amount of people every year. So a really simple, tangible example is when we're undertaking that recruitment activity, the traditional way is an awful lot of people reviewing and eyeballing CVs. Do they meet the requirements? And you go through a huge matching process to make sure you get the right people working on the right processes at the right time. Well, actually, we've deployed AI to that process where you take a set of requirements, you look at a huge pool of candidates, which is often the case, particularly when you're needing to scale up in a big way for government quickly, and you remove an awful lot of that bottleneck and filter it right down to the appropriate skills, the appropriate experiences. So those are the sort of things that we're now able to do by partnering with technology organizations. In that case, we've done that with Salesforce. But you're bringing together people, process, and technology to make a real shift, and that's the kind of size and scale of what can be done now, which is exciting.
I'm sure a lot of people in government, recruitment is a constant challenge in government as well, and at speed and scale occasionally as.
It's every organisation of size around the world. So when you look at it, the scale of opportunity when you bring in a business and you look at a scan of your organisation or operation, finding opportunities really isn't the problem. There's an awful lot that can be done. So there's exciting times ahead, I think.
So, Duncan, I know this is something you're thinking about. But also, is there anything you want to add to the discussion of agentic? But I know that you are thinking about this in I.AI. So could you also kind of share with us what kind of use cases you are looking at? Is it something you think we'll see in government soon?
Well, the fact is that right now Agentic AI means whatever you want it to mean if you're selling something. So you'll see all kinds of people on LinkedIn saying, "Here's my Agentic AI solution to whatever," and it's basically just sort of, it's ChatGPT with some bells and whistles on it. There are two big things going on in Agentic AI right now, and I think it's really important to think about them sort of separately. One is autonomous decision making, which is a really fraught and really complicated area that has sort of threads going out into public trust, into accountability, into quality of service, responsibility, all of this stuff. And that is where the really knotty and interesting problems are. And those are the problems we're going to be wrestling with, I think, for the next sort of decade or so. There's another kind of slightly less controversial aspect to it, which is this idea of kind of decentralization, federation, things acting, sort of some sense in which maybe, again, a bit to your point earlier, Ben, where you can leave things kind of where they are and you can have agents which tie them together. Data is provided in a more or less standard way. It doesn't have to be quite as, it used to be when you share data, you have to be really strict, schemas, everything had to be perfect. That's not really true anymore. You can sort of fudge it in a way which gets you 80% of the value with less than 20% of the effort. So I think that stuff is going to be in the short to medium term where loads of the advantage is going to come from. So one of the things that we're thinking about in the incubator is how can we enable teams to effectively provide data in a way which is going to enable them to come up with the ideas or support the tools which they can generate perhaps in their own departments, and also maybe share those things across government in a way which they haven't been able to before. So, we were lucky last year or so, Richard Pope wrote this great book, Platform Land, all about departmental interoperability. That, I think, doesn't take into account a lot about how this would work. I think he sets out a real vision, but doesn't set out how exactly it could work. But I think in the idea of a sort of federated ecosystem of data providers, you can see glimmers of something where that could maybe work. And AI maybe in that case isn't doing all of that hard decision-making stuff, but it's a bit of the kind of the oil in the machine, which is going to help us to loosen up and incentivize people to make some of those things. So just to come concretely back to what we're working on in the incubator, one of our projects, GovAI, is about sort of enabling teams to provide that data in a boring standard way to power, as it might be, their customer service, call center, back-end chatbot, or as it might be, some of their decision-making processes, but trying to stay away generally, unless we can put in those processes for human oversight, from the meatier decision-making stuff, at least in the short term. That's not true of all teams. That's just my sort of instinct, but I think that's probably the way it's going to go.
Okay. Did you want to say something, Ben?
I was going to say something actually, and I don't want to plug it too much, but it's in my bag, that book.
Oh, is it? Oh, good.
Oh, yeah, it's very good. Yeah. I think it gives us the opportunity to move towards one gov that we haven't had before. I think being able to join up these disparate departments, local councils, TfL, all those different areas together, we always stopped at the data sharing aspect. That's the bit where we had difficulties. We don't know how this information goes backwards and forwards. I think this is the thing that is the force multiplier, I feel like, the thing that's going to maybe let us move into that domain.
So it's all that's really exciting vision and a prospect to look forward to. Owen, what do you see as the key things that leaders should be doing now to help kind of prepare for that change?
I guess we're in a scenario where the need to change is absolutely apparent. So everyone and all of us have to be ready for that. I think some of the most simple and pragmatic things we can get into, how do we get this work? How do we get it into execution? That's the key. There's plenty of people out there who talk about AI, agentic, and the various different descriptors of that. But how do we get it to work? I think how we get it to work is being pragmatic. It's being practical. It's looking at things like doing a scan of the business. Where are those high volume processes where there's an intersection between people, technology, and process? Identify those areas, find the opportunities, scan and triage those opportunities. And when you've done the legwork to identify, whether you do that yourself or you work with people like Duncan or other government departments, when you prioritize those things that give you the biggest benefit or the biggest opportunity, go and speak to somebody who's actually done it. Now, that doesn't mean you need to speak to industry, but speak to colleagues in different government departments. Speak to industry if you want, but actually speak to people who've delivered something. I mean, if we talk about the TfL example, it's a registrations process. A registrations process, or the validation of documentation and the reduction of fraud, that pretty much applies to every government department or process in some way, shape or form. So when you identify the things you think you need to change, or where there's an opportunity to change, look at the things that are already done, the things that are already in flight, whether that's the Dodge example or whatever else, and apply it to your set of problems. Because if you do that, the likelihood of that high proof of concept failure rate massively diminishes, and the chances of a successful delivery implementation and some of the amazing benefits that HMRC have seen on the Dodge program are absolutely available. And and back to the point right at the start, we all need to change because of the pressures on public spending, consumer expectations. So we've got to get on with it, but be practical. Speak to people who've done it would be my advice.
And could I ask you to give us, to kind of make it practical in our listeners' minds, give us maybe some thoughts on the kind of roles that you think, so you've spoken about registration and so forth, are there other things that you think bots and agents could be doing in the public sector in the near future?
So I think Ben or Duncan touched on contact activity. So if you look at key priorities for all of us, reducing fraud, reducing error, cutting down waste, driving up productivity, that applies to caseworking. The caseworking example I gave earlier in terms of a recruitment process, that's actually, using Salesforce as a casework platform. That's exactly what it does. Any contact type activity, there's a huge amount of value and benefits in the contact center sphere. ID and verification, processing of large volumes of information. It applies across all of those areas. So there's no doubt the scale of opportunity is there. I think everyone conceptually gets and agrees with that. The trick is the how. I think it's how you do it. And that's where I think really getting involved with those people's teams, organizations who've actually done it, that is where you get the traction. So that's what we're looking to do to ourselves and for our clients is, have those proof points. Where have we done it? Can we apply it to this adjacent use case? And that's where we'll be successful. And that's where we drive value for our clients.
Yeah. That's the real value that you partners in the private sector bring, is that perspective that you can say, we've done it with this client here. Duncan, can I just ask you quickly to tell us how you and the team in AI can be helping people approach the how on this? Is there anything else you want to plug in terms of the support you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good example is our a consult product, which is a way to automate the processing of public consultations. So you get a consultation with 100,000 responses. It's going to take someone, kind of a year to read all of that stuff if it's just one person. And obviously, what happens is departments procure third parties to do a lot of the reading and analysis for them. It gets a bit fuzzy legally about who's deciding what and reading what, and then basically the whole process is very, very slow. It's a one-shot process. You do your analysis once. There are loads of variables. There's lots of human error in the process, frankly, because of course there is. So the idea is use the AI to read the responses, maybe come up with some sensible buckets and try and draw some early inferences. Again, probably 80-20 in terms of getting the information out. So what's really interesting about this is that it touches on that kind of public trust issue, because this is about the public being represented in a legislative process, and so you really have to get it right in terms of how you're presenting it back to them and how you're understanding their things. So all departments have different risk appetites for this stuff. Some of them will try and do everything in house already. Some of them will happily outsource. Some of them will outsource to companies that'll do more AI, for example. So working with departments to figure out what's their, I don't want to say risk appetite, because that implies that it's all sort of, that it's all risk. It's kind of like, how do you feel confident in the outputs of one of these processes? What sort of level of human review do you need? And it would be really great one day to come to a place where we could say to departments, we basically all agree that this is an okay way of sort of checking this out. And these are the sign-offs that you might want. These are the review processes you might want. But we're really getting into the nitty-gritty with that. It's not theoretical. We're not writing reports. We are there working with teams on the ground every day, looking at the outputs with them and figuring out, what could be going wrong here, what's going to get better. So that's a really concrete example of working with teams to help them adopt.
And a really helpful. So I think part of the challenge is people needing the language, as and they have those conversations around this new technology that we've not necessarily had that conversations around.
We don't have the language yet. I mean, we have old-fashioned machine learning things like accuracy or whatever, are these kind of quite blunt instruments in terms of statistics. But when we talk about error, we don't really have language for, putting things in the wrong bucket, coming up with the wrong bucket, misrepresenting, misreading. There's probably a whole discipline to grow up around how you understand error in AI. And we ought to remember that we're kind of right at the beginning of it and we don't really know how to talk about this stuff yet.
Yeah. So could I ask all of you, if there is someone listening to this who's been inspired and has an idea where they think actually, an agent or an autonomous system could solve a problem in my team, what advice would you give them? Just something brief, Ben, could you kick us off?
Talk to us. I think it's the very, very first thing. There are plenty of opportunities for people to get involved. In HMRC, we have our own large language models now, so we have our own AI sort of center that we're working on. People can get in touch inside there. And my big boss, Daljit, is very, very keen on people delivering value themselves, so being able to own those tools. And we will be rolling out more and more things that allow people to do that within guardrails that protect them. So, yeah.
Thank you. Owen, some advice from you?
Test your hypothesis. Test it with people who've done it. In HMRC, this is where you go. Speak to Ben. Go and validate your hypothesis. Gather ideas, validate them, test them with people who've done it, and then you can move into execution. And then you can start to see some really profound benefits. And to Ben's point earlier, this typically doesn't remove, headcount or roles. What it does is it frees people up to do high value activity. And that's what we see every time we do it. And when we do it, we often see, we've sought to remove manual, mundane activity, but we actually start to see quality improvements, which is a little bit to what Duncan was saying on risk earlier. People have a reluctance or a skepticism in terms of control, which I totally get. And I think you should go into an opportunity with that in mind. But actually what we've seen is when you've taken manual processes and you've applied AI to those processes, very often the quality goes up because the risk of human error is diminished. So, really, really powerful. Test your hypotheses, test them hard, look at what the hurdles are, and then speak to the people who've done it, and they'll help you get it done.
Thank you. And Duncan, a piece of advice from you?
I think there's so much good sense has been talked already. I mean, hypothesis, yes, please. Working with people who are really close to the problem is a thing that we can do now. The one thing that's happened recently, which is kind of like worrying for us technologies, but probably amazing for everyone else, is that the barrier for entry to make a thing, which is so much more powerful than just a sentence, just an argument, it is within the grasp of someone who's willing to spend a few evenings kind of sussing out a few things on the internet to make stuff you can click on and works. And that is really exciting and dangerous and cool. I don't think anyone is expecting this stuff to go into production or be operated properly. But if you're in a team and you can effectively feel empowered to solve your problems for yourself, I think, as you were saying, Ben, and potentially some of those bits and pieces are lying around in terms of, this is how you connect to the database, this is how you can present this to your colleagues. Giving people that stuff, I think, is potentially a very powerful and exciting way of kind of like fertilizing some of those ideas and doing some cross-pollination.
Yeah. So, and as you say, that's not necessarily something we're going to then see rolled out, everywhere, but it's able to test some of those ideas and explore what will work, and then come to a partner who can help you work it, and come to someone like Ben who can tell you how to do it.
100%. We need to not gatekeep anymore. I think it's been a big problem in digital traditionally to sort of gatekeep a lot, but the gate is being torn down at this point, and we ought to embrace that.
Lovely. Thank you. I think that's a nice note to end. So thank you to Ben, Owen and Duncan for joining me today, to Capita for supporting this episode, and to you all for listening to Changemakers. Do subscribe to the Civil Service World podcast so that you'll get the next episode right in your feed, along with a range of other informed and informative podcasts from the CSW team.